Right, we're going to go ahead and get kicked off. Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Andrew Graff. I am Chief Product Officer at Team Dynamics, and I'm excited to be with you today. We recently spent time working with IDC on a market study, which really explored how organizations are trying to modernize IT service management. It was a comprehensive study. Actually, many of you maybe participated. I am joined by Tempest, who is the research manager at IDC, and she focuses on ITSM. So we're very happy to have her here. And we'll be digging through her research and having lots of conversation about what she found. And if you haven't seen the report, you can get it on our website. And at the very end of this, I'll tell you how to do that on the website. So with that, Snow, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Yes, as Andrew mentioned, I'm a research manager studying IT service management software. So as part of that, I do independent research and I talk to a lot of tech leaders like IT directors and other people responsible for IT service management and enterprise service management. And I get a lot of questions, especially about IT service management modernization and planning and directions to take ITSM. And then Team Dynamics also, I think, had similar experiences and came to us and sponsored an in-depth survey on IT service management, modernization, and maturity. So what we'll be doing here is going through the results of the survey and kind of talking about how the survey results fit with our audience's experiences and what we're all hearing from practitioners. And I'll talk first. These are market trends that I often see myself and hear from people and have seen in other surveys that I've conducted. So one is digital transformation or other things just leading to just being more tech in general throughout organizations. One example, you walk into a store there, now there's a tablet there and you have to manage that, right, and serve it. And I think all of us are experiencing as we do our jobs, there are more and more different tools that you're using to do your job, and IT is responsible for supporting all of those. And as you can see, the next bullet point is IT staffing and time constraints. And that's the other thing I hear. They've got the same IT staff. They can't really hire a lot more people, but they've got more and more questions and types of questions and requests and incidents coming in. The other thing I hear is IT teams are prioritizing or being asked to prioritize the experience employees have with IT. And that can mean everything from their experience with their technology and how well it's working and how well IT responds to whether the technology is working, to how is their experience with interacting with the service technicians, to tying into human resources systems and IT being a support for the whole employee experience within the company. I think all of those are part of it. And then as more and more things are supported by technology, I start to see more concerns with digital resilience. So that's including things like just things staying up and being able to address issues quickly when something is not working right, or also security to some extent. And so we will talk soon about our key findings, but I believe the next thing we'd like to do is poll our audience. So to see where the audience for this session is experiencing challenges.
Yeah, so I think when you look at this poll, figure out, think about your organization and what is getting in the way of your group achieving its objectives. So we're getting good participation. And these were some of the questions asked in the research study. So it'll be really interesting to see if there's correlation between the research study and what all of you have to say. And my guess is there will be.
And we did not offer an all of the above choice for this one. I think if I remember correctly, in the poll, people could pick more than the separate study we did. I think people could pick more than one. So we'll see if people have to pick just one
Yeah.
here, how that goes.
Well, it looks like we have pretty good response. Let's go ahead and see what everyone had to say. So IT team time constraints. Snow, is that surprising to you?
No, it is not. That is what we found also in the study that we did, that was conducted over the internet. And the IT operation costs were high. I noticed in this broader poll where people could pick more than one answer, that security vulnerabilities was higher. So what I'm taking from that is maybe it's a priority, but it's not the number one for everybody, but it's common to a lot of people. And we had time constraints, and then there's the cost of developers and other resources are another constraint here. So yeah, but I think that IT team time constraints is heavy, and for some of the reasons that I talked about earlier, that's what I hear a lot. Just that people just have the team that they have. There's only so much they can add people, but they just have more and more demands. So that's something I see a lot.
Yeah, that tracks with what we're seeing as well with prospects and customers, that demands keep increasing, but resources happen. So IT teams are looking for ways to become more effective, more efficient, and there's all sorts of tools that have recently become viable, which we're going to get into discussing. But when you think about IT being overwhelmed, right, that leads to a lot of things. Another study we had done with a large research organization suggested that the IT resource constraints and IT resources having to spend time on mundane toil contributed to attrition, people leaving their jobs, which is really, really challenging. And also that cost of developers component. So IT is being asked from a service management perspective to transform. Some of those transformations involve integration and automation, right, to address this resource constraint, but developers are really expensive. And so it's this catch-22 that we're seeing there.
And that's kind of what we're seeing with the strategic goals and priorities in this survey that we conducted. The organization's overall strategic goals and priorities that IT service management or enterprise service management can help the most. The top priority was to improve the quality of service of IT. But when we just talked about that push and pull, right? You want to improve the quality of service, but you're more and more constrained. And that's kind of what a lot of people are challenged by. Later on, we're going to talk about what people have done to overcome challenges. As a matter of fact, like we planned this survey to talk about maturity, and we found like a high level of maturity compared to many other disciplines in tech, right? Like most people have IT service management, most people have it implemented to some degree, but it's getting to that more modern level or the more mature level where they still are challenged to get to that next level, and we'll talk about what people have done. But yeah, and when we find quality of service, what people seem to connect that to is rapid responses and rapid fixes. We can talk about this a little more later, but it was being, having 24/7 access to a chat or faster response times as an improvement. And then they also connected improved IT service management to employee productivity. And you can see how that would be connected. If you can get your problem solved faster, you can get back to work faster. So I think that those are all considerations, and they're things that IT teams are certainly aware of and working on. But I think people are probably joining this to see where they fit among their peers, and that's if you're dealing with that, you're not the only one. So some of the constraints we saw, this is a summary. In the full report, we go into more of the details. But time spent on manual tasks, people are spending, hours per week total on things that are manual that possibly could be automated. And then that's another push and pull where if you're spending that time, then you're not spending the time doing the automation. They're spending time on administrative overhead, team constraints like we talked about, and the difficulty of integrating with other systems.
Yeah, one of the things that I always think about, and this was a customer came up with this, and they called this the toil, right? That people are toiling on manual tasks that could be automated, and that it's often a scenario where your customer doesn't want to have to wait on you to do something manually, right? They want it to be done, and it could be automated, but the tools that they have in place are really high overhead, so it's hard to actually implement the automations or integrations that would make that happen. And so you're caught on a hamster wheel, right? You don't have the time to build the integrations automations because the tools are complex and have high overhead, and so the situation doesn't improve, and your customer expectations are changing. They want 24/7, 365, and many of the requests they make, whether it's changing a name, asking for a PTO balance, submitting a day, submitting PTO, or getting access to a piece of software, they don't want to have to wait on that type of request. That should happen nearly instantaneously. So it's this challenging situation where IT needs to transform. The teams are constrained. Until recently, the tools that you could do this with required a lot of development work and scarce, expensive resources. So, I mean, I think this is a significant challenge from what we're seeing.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and it's a challenge when you've got things still coming at you while you're trying to solve it. Um, which is the situation a lot of people are in. I mean, I've had conversations with tech leaders about modernization where the conversation we were having got interrupted by them getting called to deal with an incident, It
Mhm.
just, that's the situation that they're in. And I think people in IT like problem solving, but they do have a lot of juggling to do. So we'll talk about we talked about what people are doing to address some of these challenges, and automation and AI come in quite often. Um, so this is another response from the report. One of the challenges is resource constraints. So we talked about time constraints. That's one type of resource constraint, but it could be others that we're also kind of in the poll, right? Like the cost of updating things, um, other types of constraints. People did find some burdens with the overhead of the tools they were using in their responses to this poll, and then lack of automation was quite high. And that goes back to what we were just talking about. People have a lot of manual tasks and time they're spending on things that could be automated. So they're aware of the lack of automation. Um, and then we'll get into what they are doing and where there's room for continued modernization and maturity. So again, another challenge is integrating with legacy tools. And I think one thing that jumps out to me about this, just based on other research I've done, is I think a lot about like more proactive IT service management, kind of being able to kind of know what's going on with your system and quickly address issues. And then also with automation, you often an integration is part of the automation, to be able to just take steps and then update things. So I think those are some areas where integration is important, and that's why people see it as a challenge. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, the way I think about the previous slide in this one is that you, IT, especially IT service management leaders, I think have a pretty good idea of what they'd like to do. Right? I don't talk to too many people who are like, oh, we don't even know where to start, right? Most people said, hey, I have a wish list of things we want to do. Automation is usually on there, leveraging AI to improve efficiency, using integration so that the conversations, for example, in conversational AI can be personalized and somebody can get information without somebody actually having to retrieve it and then communicate it. There's usually great vision. What I see is that implementing the vision is often difficult because of that high overhead of the products or the technologies requiring specialized skill sets. So what we see is a disconnect between the vision, which is usually pretty well formed, and actually being able to execute. And so, our organization, what we're constantly trying to do is figure out how do we allow the people with the ideas to actually execute. And this comes down to being able to transform quickly. I mean, I think all of us can sit here and think about our technology stack and what we were leveraging even 18 months ago, and it's changed. for most organizations, right? The tools that we have and the way we do business has changed pretty dramatically. And so what I think one of the big challenges is IT service management leaders and IT leaders see what can happen, right? They can see out there what needs to change, but it just takes so long and the gears are grinding to get there. And so I think this has a lot to do with the agility of the organization as much as it does with the resource constraints, right? If you're more agile, you can implement the changes, the automations, the integration, start leveraging AI, right? You can allow your people to focus on providing incredibly high levels of service where a human being is needed. And there's a lot of those scenarios, right? And not be distracted with all of the mundane toil. But I think, again, that the overhead of getting that done, it has been daunting for a lot of people in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I've found when I've talked to people who were succeeding at deflecting cases while keeping their customer satisfaction high, that was the balance they were achieving, is they were getting people those quick responses to the routine things
Mhm.
with automations or AI. And then
Yes,
that frees up the time where the staff person, when somebody really does want or need to talk to a person, where the person was more available to help them because they weren't dealing
yes,
with those low level things. So it's actually a good employee experience on both sides sometimes. Yeah, as an employee, like sometimes you don't mind talking to the bot if it just solves your problem quickly and you
right,
can get back to what you were doing. And then sometimes you
right.
really do want to talk to a person. So
Yeah, I recently spoke with a customer who was our sysadmin, not a developer. And basically they used conversational AI and some automation, and they're saving about 100 hours a month. And it's not that big a team, honestly. And I asked him, I'm like, well, what's been the benefit? He's like, well, what's been the benefit is our customer satisfaction's gone up because they're not, A, not waiting around for simple answers or actions, and B, they feel like we're actually spending the time they need when they actually need a person. And our employee satisfaction has gone up because they're able to spend the time they think is necessary to actually fix somebody's problem in the first dialogue. And they're not buried by all of these little easy things where they're literally just a mouse jockey. They're not using their brain at all to help solve the problem. They're clicking, clicking, clicking. They're not doing that anymore. So I thought that was a pretty interesting outcome.
yes, that's what I'm hearing too. I mean, that brings in a few other challenges. Like once you get to that stage, you have to kind of um bring in, that's not a challenge, but it's new ways to look at things, like how you train your employees differently because the kinds of questions they're answering is different. But that's not a bad thing. It's just something as you move forward, there are
Yeah,
additional things to be agile from and continue to adjust.
yeah, I agree.
And as we talked about, as you mentioned, Andrew, I think people are thinking about these things because when we asked which of these AI enabled features or various types of features will be planning to implement in an IT service management tool, there were generative AI and AI enabled features in a lot of cases that people were planning to implement. So it's definitely something that people are thinking about and looking at, um, or have started implementing and plan to continue working on. So like generative AI enabled knowledge management, AI enabled technician assistant. Then those tend to be, I can see why the one is higher than the other because sometimes the one gives the information that then you do the knowledge management and that helps assist the technician, and then the AI assisted chat. Is there
Yeah,
anything else you're hearing about the?
yeah. It's interesting. I think the ability to effectively implement generative AI, but effectively and efficiently has really changed in the last 12 months. So the technologies have changed quite a bit. Um, and, we're talking about using AI to be additive, using AI to leverage existing resources and tools to help answer a question or automate a service. So, I'll give you an example. You may have in your organization a lot of answers in your websites, in a knowledge base, maybe they're in PDF documents or Word documents or an employee handbook. Well, with newer what's called retrieval augmented generation technologies, you can now leverage that. So whereas before you might have said, oh my gosh, it will be daunting for us to compile all of our knowledge together and then format it and put it in an AI platform, the tools are getting a lot better at essentially just feeding in content so that your AI tools are useful right out of the gate based upon existing knowledge. That's a major change, right? And that's removing a major roadblock. The other, I think, when you're looking at especially conversational AI, I think its ability to use generative AI and traditional AI to answer questions has improved dramatically. The most important thing, in my perspective, is being able to automate the fulfillment of requests using conversational AI. So somebody asks a question and it's not just spitting back an answer, it's saying, hey, here's your PTO balance. Would you like to submit a day of PTO? Yeah, I would. I mean, I think gone are the days where somebody wants a link to the knowledge base article that shows them how to go into paychecks and submit a day of PTO. They just want to get it done. And I think those technologies, the technologies are there from an automation perspective where you no longer need to be a hardcore software developer to actually make that work. So when you're thinking about AI, I think one of the most important things, especially with conversational AI and thinking about servicing customers, is how easy is it to automate the fulfillment of requests, right? When you're looking at those technologies, the joining of those two capabilities, that is the magic. That's the secret sauce. Just having conversational AI to answer questions is good. Just having automation to, for example, help a technician once a request gets submitted and it automates the processes, that's good, right? Both of those are good. When you combine those two things, that's amazing.
And that's what the poll found when we asked what functionality is critical to a successful AI chat rollout. The top response was ability to process the requests through automation. So that's definitely what we found that people in IT out there are thinking as well.
Yeah, and I think that's actually where the AI assistant and automation industries are lagging, that combination. I think that's the secret. It's combining those things, and we don't see very many technology providers doing both well. It's something we've actually focused a lot on in the last 24 months in our organization.
So I think the next topic, we've kind of talked about these already, the steps toward maturity. But we can talk more about, next we can talk about what people are automating. And what was interesting that I found here, so these are functions that people have currently automated in IT service management tool. And there was only one that had more than half of respondents, and that was password resets. And that was only slightly half. But what I found fascinating about this was a lot of them had a pretty significant percentage of respondents. So I just found it really interesting that a lot of people are automating things, but they're not all starting in the same place. And I do think that makes sense when I talk to people about their technology world or their businesses. People have different needs, right? So, for example, I talked to an organization that was hospitality, and they had a very high need to automate their employee onboarding and offboarding because they had a lot of seasonal employees. So at certain times a year, they had a lot of people come in, and then 3 months later, those people would go back out of the system, but they might come back the next year. So they prioritized that. They had it working really smoothly. And then they had other things on this list that they didn't have at all, and they weren't as concerned about it. And I think that, you talk about that organization, and there could be another one that had another one as a high priority for some other reason, right? So I just found it fascinating how widespread it was. And I think it shows something about kind of the maturity levels that so many organizations have something automated, but it's quite rare that everybody has everything. That's kind of where we are as a IT.
I agree with you. We're seeing the exact same thing. It's similar to that question when a question that's been asked for maybe 15 years is, hey, has your organization implemented ITIL? I don't know a single organization who has implemented ITIL, right? I know a lot of organizations that have implemented incident and part of change and whatever from that library was useful to them to solve their biggest pains. I can't, I honestly can't think of an organization that has implemented every part of ITIL. I'm seeing a similar situation with using AI and automation. Now, what's interesting is when I look at this list, I'm guessing that most people watching, and our organization included, when I think about us internally, none of these are bad ideas. Like I think everyone here would say, yes, I would like to do every one of those. But it doubles back now on resource constraints, right? You have finite resources to solve problems. And so there's prioritization that's going on. And I think, again, this comes back to finding technology solutions that allow more people, not just your developers, to actually develop solutions, right, to some of these things, expanding that community of people who can actually execute to get more of these things checked off the list. I mean, I don't know how you, if you, feel so similarly or seeing similar things in your conversation with customers, but that's what I'm seeing when I talk to ours.
I see, I mean, it's related to that faster response scenario, just being able to automate more things. So
Mhm.
you it's fewer steps and it's faster to respond to things. I think we actually did ask in this poll. We don't have all the slides for it here, but we did ask some of the ITIL areas, which ones you have implemented, and it was like you were saying, it was everybody had them to some degree, but most people didn't find it was fully implemented in any given area. And I think with ITIL 4, the standards have shifted kind of to
Yeah.
more acknowledging that's where most people are, and kind of start where you are and prioritize what works for you.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, like you said, people do look at these and think, they'd all be nice to have to some degree. And it's
Right.
also okay to start with the ones that make sense
Right. Right.
most for how you work.
Yeah, exactly.
And then let's see. There are some tasks that organizations still run mostly manually. Equipment replacement was quite high. Some of these other ones as well, system audits and compliance checks. I don't know if these are resonating with the audience. Software in general is one that I hear a lot about: software provisioning, software asset management. Um, so those are some of the ones that are not as much automated currently. So we have a poll. Um,
I love
one,
this one. This is the sort of, if you could automate something from this list, what would it be? And this is,
and
I love this question.
I'm wondering if we're going to get different answers here to this survey, because I think the survey is, what are your plans? And some of that
Yeah.
depends on like previous automations and previous steps that you might have taken. But this is just wave a wand, pie in the
Yeah.
pie. So we'll see.
I kind of wish the audience could see what we're seeing right now, and then these bars moving and with, they compete for votes, um, which I think is really, really interesting. And people are, this is good. Snow, this is really good participation. Like lots of people are actually answering these questions. I think we have a quorum here, so I'm going to share the results. Snow, what do you think about this?
Onboarding and offboarding. I wonder if I skewed the audience talking about the benefits of onboarding and offboarding. I think that is a popular one though.
Mhm.
Um,
It's also one of the more complex
it
as
is,
well.
which may go back to our just waving a wand thing, because
Right.
if you looked at some of the previous um poll, like we had employee onboarding and offboarding, but then some of the other items on the poll were potentially components of that, like the provisioning aspects. So if you think about people planning to implement some piece that would ultimately contribute, but if they could wave a wand, maybe they went straight to the on and offboarding.
It's interesting. We see a lot of our customers with our integration automation layer focusing on onboarding, offboarding, and I think it's because there are so many moving parts that A, it's very time consuming, and B, there's a lot of pain. So figuring out how to extract the pain from that process, because it involves so many different departments, so many different technologies, right? It is very painful and something that takes 35 hours on average for IT. That's something that nobody likes to participate in. So I think that's why that's my opinion, is that people are like, this is a problem. Everyone thinks it's a problem. If we can fix this, it can start momentum with automation. Well, if we can fix this, people would say, that's really neat. What else can we automate? Right? Because it's widely recognized as a pain.
It comes back to security kind of being that through thread that comes through,
Yeah,
because there's so many
great point.
security
That's a
factors, especially in
great
offboarding,
point.
making sure people no longer have access when they leave.
Yep.
But it is a lot of pieces to put together to just declare that you've automated offboarding.
Yeah, I had a CIO, one of our CIOs said, onboarding is more painful, offboarding is higher risk.
And I think when we see those security things just kind of floating
Yeah,
in there, and a lot of the responses, I think they come up too in the priorities or the wish
yeah.
list. So we'll talk to some more steps toward maturity based on this peer group. So we'll do another poll.
I think this one focuses on enterprise service management. So, IT is constrained, but so are lots of other departments. And I'm sure that you as IT practitioners collaborate on certain business processes with other departments. And so I think that the nature of this is, hey, are there other departments using service management concepts and tools in your organization? Because I do think this is essentially enterprise service management is a really interesting thing to me, because it is a strategic opportunity for IT from what we're seeing. So IT is typically the most well-versed in process for providing service, right? There's lots of parts of an organization that are service oriented. We've seen IT groups take the service management platform, if it's built for enterprise service management, meaning the HR department doesn't have to speak IT. It can be just their processes, their verbiage. IT data is not intermingled. If that's the case, IT becomes consultative to the organization and goes out and it raises uh, their strategic standing in the organization. Really interesting. And let's see here. So interesting. It looks like people are dipping their toe.
Dipping there, so 1 to 3 departments, the most common answer, but
Yeah.
then tied for second are only IT or 4 to 8 departments.
Yeah.
That's
Then we've got,
another, like,
then
where are
we've got the
you
black belts,
again?
13%
13%
black
painful.
belts.
But I think there's a wide range, so I think
Mhm.
I'm not surprised to see that either, kind of with where people are. Anybody who's picking any of these is definitely not alone. um, but yeah, and so we'll compare that to, I think this group on this poll may be ahead of the overall responses to the survey. So the first question we asked is, are you using enterprise service management, and to what extent? Actually, we had, okay, so 35% said it's implemented for IT services. So it's over a third, but then the rest are either planning to implement it, starting to implement, or have it implemented but not fully. So that's the majority. Thinking about it but not really there.
You
Um,
know, this doesn't surprise me, and there's an undercurrent here that we notice, and that is that most IT groups think it's a good idea for other groups to adopt better service management tools and practices and collaboration tools so departments can work better together. What we have also found is IT doesn't need one more system to administer. They don't. If you walk to some IT organizations like, hey, wouldn't it be great if you could expand your service management platform to 50 departments? the initial reaction is, whoa, 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 wait a minute. Would we have to maintain all of this stuff? Like, would I need to be providing support to all their end users and changing forms and adding workflows? And so that's something that as an organization, we had to really focus on years ago to make it easy for the non-IT groups to own their own thing. And if they want to change a form, they don't have to go out to IT to have that done. They don't have, if they want a new workflow, they didn't have to do that. That's a major constraint to the expansion of ESM, that system overhead. We keep coming back to that, but it's a it's a major constraint.
Yeah, and I think some IT departments I've talked to that had challenges, it was the opposite, that the other department would go out and choose a tool and then come to IT and ask them to support it. And they had to have that
Yeah,
conversation, like, what can you bring us in earlier and we'll see what maybe
right,
we have. Like you bring us in,
right.
tell us your objectives, and we'll see what maybe we already have that
Yeah.
gets you toward those goals. Um, but that is an interesting point too, because of the resource constraints. You want it to be easy to expand. You want it to be something that reduces the resource constraints, not another increase on them.
And I'm not surprised by this list of essentially the different areas. I mean, HR is largely a service organization, so is finance, facilities. This doesn't surprise me at all. The only surprise here is, and maybe it's just the complexion of the respondents, but we've seen legal being higher in certain industries where there's lots of contract reviews, lots of questions for compliance. So I would say if you look by industry, that's the one I think that would flex to a higher percentage depending on the industry. But overall, I this is kind of your research aligns with what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think it does. It varies somewhat by industry, and I think some of these start to get looped in, like as you take enterprise service management into human resources, they start to have a lot of overlaps with these other departments like finance,
Mhm.
facilities, and like you said, legal.
Yeah,
Uh, and then it tends to go on from there.
yeah, I agree.
But it's interesting to see our live polls too, and people sharing their own experiences here.
Well, I think it makes sense. You know, we've talked about a lot of topics around agility and being able to execute on the opportunities to integrate AI, better workflow integration, et cetera. You know, what we've prepared for this is to take some of these concepts that came from Snow's research and the concepts we've talked about and put a visual on it. So we're joined by my colleague Tiffany, who is going to give you an overview of the Team Dynamics platform, which is a AI-driven, automation-driven enterprise service management tool, and just put a visual on it. And you know, this is not to say that Team Dynamics is the right fit for your organization. This is really just to give you the concepts. You may have a tool that you already use that could do some of these things. You know, clearly, we obviously anytime we will explore with you whether we're a good fit. But really, the point of this is to give you some ideas, right? To take some of Snow's research in this conversation and visualize how that might actually work in practice. So, Tiffany, hand it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I am going to get my screen share going here, and you all should see the client portal within Team Dynamics. We've talked a lot about making sure that you create a great end user experience for the folks that you're working with and supporting, and how that can be a reciprocal relationship. As you improve the experience for them, it can improve the experience for the tech team, freeing them up to solve more interesting problems and freeing them from that mundane toil that Andrew was talking about as well. And making sure that they have a front end where they can find the answers they need, maybe engage in a chatbot conversation or review and submit requests is really going to be the starting point for that. We talked a lot about how AI can help improve that experience for those end users. And down here in the bottom corner, I have my little chatbot that can do a lot of what Andrew and Snow were talking about previously. Maybe proactively communicate by leveraging some of those integrations on the back end to surface information in tickets or other areas about outages that are being managed, or maybe important dates that are coming up, suggesting some frequent types of responses, allowing people to hop over to a live agent if that's how they'd prefer to communicate, or even solving problems for people as well. And we talked a lot about making sure that any new system that you bring in is easy to configure. And part of that can include making sure that you have quick time to value. And so, one of the things that we can do with a chatbot like this is point it to sets of knowledge. Andrew talked about knowledge base articles, PDFs, web pages, other areas, and have it generate answers for folks. So, I can come in here and ask it to tell me about team dynamics. I cheekily pointed it to our website earlier today, and it can summarize a quick message about who Team Dynamics is and what they do. But we can really take that to the next level for our end users too by actually automating some of those tasks that we were just looking at from the research that Snow and IDC did. That could include things like we saw on that list, right? Equipment refreshes. Maybe our end users want to know if they are eligible for a replacement computer, and we want to automate that process for them if they are. You can see that I'm already logged in, and so we're going to leverage my authentication information when doing that. And so if I can say something like, can I get a new laptop? We're going to leverage the information we know about me as a user, connect it to our other systems where we have that asset information being stored, or maybe even syncing it into a work management platform to really benefit from that interconnectedness. And then behind the scenes, as I was talking, right, we made that assessment if this device was eligible for replacement. And then we could continue on with creating a ticket or automating that process down the line as well. And whenever we create these items, there's always going to be a mix and match of stuff that still has to be manually done. We talked about those more interesting problems or those things that a human being needs to touch instead of just clicking a button or automating a system. And so I also want to take an opportunity to look behind the scenes at what that experience can look like, as well as really drive home what we were talking about that ease of configuration so that we're not tying into those constraints on teams and we're really making sure that folks are able to improve their processes without adding a whole lot of extra work. And so in my other window here, we're taking a look at what that HR experience can look like, where they can see that information about the work that they're managing, whether it's projects work or ticket work, get the metrics that they need to justify different investments or to understand where they really need to focus and prioritize on maybe increasing those automations. We also talked about simplifying and not having to depend on the IT team to make changes. So things like adding a field to a form, it can be a simple drag and drop process for those folks, ensuring that they're able to collect the information they need without any additional input. And one of the other things we've talked about that I think is important to highlight here is how those teams can collaborate. Often, like Snow was just mentioning, part of the reason that we see ESM maturing within organizations is because of that need to collaborate. And so, folks having their own forms, their own areas can be really great, but we can also see how they can pull that information together, whether it's in a dashboard like what we see here, being able to see those collaborative efforts like onboarding that other folks are working on, or maybe visualizing it from more of a timeline style view, seeing across those different organizations and units the work that different people are responsible for. And handing out and creating all of this work can be a simple process too that can be automated. We talked about onboarding and offboarding, and I have a great example here of what that can look like, where we're getting approvals, managing both those manual tasks, but then also automating particular activities too. And, when we think about automating, we often, like we've been talking about, start thinking about that heavy burden of development for that. But if you go with a low code or no code solution like Team Dynamics, you can find that automating activities like onboarding here can be managed with simple connectors and actions, allowing you to just select what needs to happen, manage and control and transform data, and not have to know scripting or coding in order to pull this all together. We looked at quite a bit, so I'm sure some folks might have questions. Be sure to pop those in the Q&A down below, but I'll hand things back to Andrew and Snow so that we can continue our conversation.
Yeah, and you may have noticed that there is a QA area in the Zoom webinar, so you can enter any questions there that you might have. We had a few starting questions, which I love. My favorite was, where do you start with automations? What are the best areas to address? That is a really interesting question. Snow, do you have a perspective on that?
I mean, I think that it does somewhat vary by organization because
Mm.
depending on their business model and things. One thing I've written about before is some of the provisioning things I find can be a good place to start because they tend to be time consuming for IT,
Mm.
and then therefore, if you can automate it, then that's where you save some of that time you can use to keep uh, implementing more things.
Yeah, I think what we see is, or what we see people starting all over the place.
Yeah.
Onboarding, offboarding is a common
Yeah.
one. What I would say the best organizations do that we work with is they focus on fixing widely agreed upon pain, so that everyone on all sides of the transaction that's being automated doesn't like it today.
Yeah.
So that varies from organization to organization. The reason those organizations, why I think they're so effective at it, or they're so effective with automation, is because when they do that, it builds momentum. I mentioned this a little earlier. The best thing an organization can do, I think, with any sort of transformation initiative is please everyone on all sides of the transaction, because then they're all saying, well, that's really great. What else can we do? When you start with something that's not painful for some party involved in the transaction, they say, well, why would we do more automation? That's okay. So that's one thing. That's not a direct answer to this, but I think that most people, and I could do this for our organization, could write down on your whiteboard or take a note uh, in OneNote or whatever it is and say, these are the things that are painful for everyone involved. Are they automatable? Can you automate them? And should they? The other question is, should they be automated? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I've seen both sides of it. There are certain things you shouldn't automate because having a human being involved is better. So I think the two questions are, can we automate it? Should it be automated? Are really important.
Yeah, I agree with your point about the pain points too, and also they may be different by organization, because of the different types of technologies people may be using, or the business models, or how their employees work. For one organization, something being a little slow may not be a big deal, but another may do that thing 20 times a day, and having it be a little slow really adds up.
Yeah. We got another question that was interesting here. Kathleen asked, where is the information related to, am I eligible for new equipment, coming from? And in the example that Tiffany gave you, it was using an integration to look at an asset record that belonged to the person who was using the conversational AI tool, and it was looking at their replacement date. So it was validating that, yes, in fact, they have an asset that can be replaced. Sometimes people have multiple machines, so it can be set up to say, well, which one are you talking about? And you click on your Mac and it says, well, yeah, you are eligible. And then it can progress through a procurement process or submitting a ticket. So, and then it doesn't have to come from a Team Dynamics asset record. Maybe that data is stored someplace else. So I think that in that example, that's where it came from. Um, Another question came up about the Team Dynamics API for getting data to be easy to be pulled out, and for example, with a Copilot type solution, we do have a really robust API library in addition to the integration automation platform too. Let's see, what else do we have? Well, there was a question, and I think we talked about this a little bit, but which departments do you usually start with for an ESM expansion. Snow, what are you seeing? I mean, there was the survey results, right? Do the survey results align with what you're seeing when you talk directly to customers as far as how they expand outside of IT?
Um, for the most part, in I think human resources is typically the next one outside of IT. From what I hear, HR departments work closely with IT a lot of the time anyway, because of some of those things like employee onboarding and offboarding. And then they tend sometimes human resources is not a big department on its own. So they have some dedicated software, but they're not going to do custom everything. So they tend to often be the department that goes to IT and says, we need to do this. We have, even though we have resources in the name, we may not have that many resources to do this project. How can you help us? So they tend to develop those relationships early. So that tends to be a common one. And then, like I mentioned, from there, you start to get these human resources processes that overlap with some of these other groups like finance, and then it kind of goes from there as people see it.
Another question, when you talk about no code, does that mean that we can integrate to anything and at any point in the system, for digging into your ERP, pulling information flexibly, et cetera? So what does that mean? Well, and without coding. So an integration automation platform should enable an organization to leverage a set of out-of-the-box connectors, which have certain things those connectors can do to pull information or load information. And then you should be able to apply logic, right? When do I pull this information? Do I need to transform it? Do I pull information from multiple places to help answer a question? And that should be done in a visual format. You shouldn't have to do that in code. Now, the question, can you integrate with any system at any point? That's a little bit loaded. If your system that you want to integrate with has an out-of-the-box connector in the platform, great, typically a good place to start. You probably can do some things in there. Or an API, right? Does it have an API? Or do you have direct access to the database? Now, there are certain systems where none of those things hold true. Maybe it's something that was custom developed in your organization. So you need to look a little deeper at how you might do that. But for the most part, most modern web or even desktop systems today have an API of some sort, or you can go right to the database, or a vendor will provide you connectors for that. So you should be able to do a lot of what you want to do, or most of what you want to do in a no-code way. That doesn't mean it's not technical, right? You still need to be able to think in technology logic, right? But you don't need to know how to necessarily write code to do that. And so I think that's one of the most exciting advancements in the past 5 years, is that what long ago took hardcore software developers and DBAs quite a bit of time to do, right? Now you have a sysadmin or someone with a technical mind that can easily prototype and change. And as we want to add new processes, we can do that. I think that's a major deal. And again, when you combine that with conversational AI, that's where you have enormous gains as potential for your organization. When you combine those two things, where you can envision a conversation coming through a conversational AI channel, that if you could automate the fulfillment of that, that would take a huge bite out of the burden on your constrained resources. I think that all these tools, it's coalescing right now that this is possible. And I think we've been dreaming about this for 10 or 15 years. I actually think the technologies are really good to actually execute on it, which I personally believe we're at the beginning of what I call the golden age of service management, where all these things we dreamed about for so long are now within reach for the average organization, not just your largest, most resource-rich organizations. And I think that's really, really exciting.
I will say, if you find you have to kind of do some of those modernization and maturity steps to get to your golden age, you're not the only one.
Yeah.
There are plenty of people that have some practice that they need to mature, like knowledge management or whatever, in order to kind of reach some of these other ones, and that's normal if you're experiencing it.
Yeah, I that's an exceptionally good point. We got another question here. It says, is HR included in the Team Dynamics platform or a separate module? In the Team Dynamics platform, it doesn't work like some of the other industry players. In the Team Dynamics platform, basically it's user-based, so you would just license for the HR people, and then they can have their own application, and they can administer it, or IT can administer it. So it's a little more simple than having to purchase a separate application for that. Let me see here, looking at questions. We have another question. How does Team Dynamics compare to something like ServiceNow? So I think that my preamble to answering this question, I think that every service management platform on the market has its right fit, right? Where we do really, really well in meeting customers' needs is when an organization is maturing, they have advanced needs either today or on the horizon, but they don't want to staff 10, 15, 20 app developers to maintain that application. So I think we're the best mix of capability and cost of ownership. And that's not necessarily license cost. That means what it actually takes to care for and feed that tool after you've implemented. And I think with a ServiceNow, highly capable, but also high overhead. We, I think, are the best solution for an organization that has some of those advanced needs, but they don't want to expend the budget, or they don't want to dedicate the many FTE to caring for and feeding that solution, or relying on consultants. I mean, our model is we help you implement, we teach you how to fish, and then your non-developer resources, your sysadmins, can manage the entire platform. I think that's where we really stand out, and that's what really separates us there. Let's take a look and see if we have other questions. Let's see. There was a question here. A basic question: does Team Dynamics offer implementation and consulting services along with the technology? The answer is yes, and there's different shades of that. I won't get into it too deeply. If you are interested in the tool, by the way, or services, etc., go to teamdynamics.com. We can absolutely assess whether we're a good fit for you. And I think that's a really important step. Any vendor who says, oh, we're absolutely the right fit for you without knowing anything about your business is crazy. Run the other way, right? But we'd love to have a substantive conversation. But we do offer, your IT service management, enterprise service management services, but we're also seeing a lot of activity around helping organizations get their arms around how do we implement AI? How do we use retrieval augmented generation, right? What are our knowledge assets? How do we put those into play? What do we automate? How do we automate that, right? How do we build an automation strategy? So we do help with those types of things as well. It looks like that might be all the time we have for questions. So I will leave you with this. Snow, thank you so much for helping with this research. I think it's incredibly valuable for people to understand what other organizations are doing. And to your point, so they read I think the guaranteed outcome, somebody reads this, is that they won't feel alone, and they'll feel like, wow, a lot of people are in the same boat as we are. The
Yeah.
second, I think, is you will take away from this research a lot of ideas. And I think that's what's really important. And obviously, you can reach out to IDC, work with IDC and analysts and researchers like Snow to help talk about these types of things with your organization. But you can also get the access to this document if you go to teamdynamics.com. It's on the page, and you scroll down the home page, and at the bottom, you can grab that report. So Snow, thank you so much. And Tiffany, thank you so much. I think we had a really substantive conversation today.
Yeah, thank you. It's always interesting to have these opportunities to connect with people and learn what they're doing. And I think like I said, it's a very interesting time in IT service management because so many people are far along, but there's still more to be done. And it's really interesting to see where people are taking things next.
Couldn't agree more. So thank you,
Thank you.
and take care, everybody.